Hey, in this lesson, we're going to look at functions in a little bit more detail. So there are two different types of functions you can use in JavaScript. There's function declaration and function expressions. And there are slight differences between the two of them. So we're going to be looking at those in this lesson. So first of all, let's do a function expression. And this is going to be similar to the idea when we're setting up variables. So we can have a variable assign a value of 1. This is going to be our function expression, where we're writing it out as an expression and then assigning a value of function to it. And we can do the same thing where we're taking in arguments as well and returning back values of those arguments. So if we want to just multiply whatever num times 10 is and then return that to the user, we can do that with a function expression and save that. And then we'll also do that within a function declaration. So that will be val2, and it's taking in the value of number and then simply returning back num times 10. So the main difference between function declarations and function expressions is that declarations load before any of the code is executed. So what that means is that we can use val2 even before the function has been declared in the code, so that we can use it because it is loading before any of the code gets executed. So if we do a console log and take val2 and pass in a number of 10, it's going to return back that value. I'm going to run that within Node app.js, and we get returned back a value of 100. But what happens if I try to do val1 and also pass in a value of 10? Do you think this is going to work? And take a look at where the code and when the interpreter will reach the code of val1. So this is actually after we're trying to use it. So let's run the code one more time and to see what throws an error there. So it's the error there is that it cannot access val1 because it's not initialized val1. So that is really the main difference. So if you do want to use the function expressions, make sure that you do declare them, as it's only function declarations that get hoisted within the code. So let's try to run that one more time and just make sure that everything is working properly, and the result is going to be the same thing that's going to get returned back. And I'll comment here that this is an expression and this is a declaration. And also, whenever we're using a function expression, we can reassign a new value to val1. So if we wanted to assign a value of 100 to val1, then when we run the code, I'm going to open it in the console, that val1 is not a function, as we've reassigned a value to that function of val1. So keep that in mind, that when you do have these function expressions, that these can be renamed. So what you want to do whenever you are creating a function expression, use const, and then if you do try to reassign a value to val1, it's going to throw an error there with the val1. So that's one of the ways that you can take precautions so that you don't accidentally reassign a new value to your function. And then also, if you do the function without the rounded brackets, it's going to return back the contents of the function. So it's not going to invoke the function. It'll just simply return back the value of the function. And you can see that as well for the function declarations. So if you're not including the rounded brackets, then that's not going to actually invoke the function. So it's something to keep in mind when you are writing your code, that if you want to reassign a value to it, you can assign val1 to val2, and that's going to assign the code to it, but it's not going to invoke the code. If you want to create immediately invoked functions, so these are functions that are anonymous functions, and they simply run whenever they get executed. So whenever they're written, they run. And this is one way to create code separation. So how you would set this up is that you would use the rounded brackets, and then within the rounded brackets, this is where you'd create the anonymous function, and you can pass in whatever parameters you want in there. and as well, then you can run the code, and this will immediately, having the rounded brackets afterwards, is going to immediately invoke the function. And I'll just type the word ready in the console. So let's do a refresh, and we can see that whenever the interpreter gets to that line of code, it'll simply just run the code and output the result. So other differences that we have between the function declaration and the function expression is that within the function expression, these are all anonymous functions. And it's a function expression that actually gets used when we create the immediately invoked function expression, which is also referred to as IIFE. So if you ever see that acronym, you know that this is referring to immediately invoked function expression. And now that we've covered function expressions and the differences between the declarations, we can see a difference of how this works and how we can use it within our code. And if we want to pass in a value into the immediately invoked function, then we can pass in a value like this into as a variable, and then this will get picked up here under E, and we can output the value of E. And that's simply going to run whatever the value is that we're passing in. So let's try that. And we see there's test being output as we're able to pass in a value into the immediately invoked function. There's also, with the newer version of JavaScript, there's the arrow expression, the function arrow expression. And we'll create a few of those. So this is val2. So setting up a const of val2 and using the arrow function expression. And we'll do the same thing where we're going to return num times 10, except it's going to look a lot shorter. So this can be done by passing in the argument of none and then using the equal sign and the greater than sign in place of the function, the word function. And if we want to return it, then we can do a num times 10 in order to return that. So this is an example of implied return. And let's do one more where we're setting up val3. And this is going to be the explicit return that's needed. So again, we're taking in the value of num and started writing the word function. We've got the arrow expression. And then within the curly brackets, just as we did with the expression before, we have return num times 10. And now let's log out all of these in the console, and we'll see if there's a difference. So we've got val3, val4. Actually, it should be val2. This should be val3. That should be val4. This is val3. That's val4. So that we've got all of the val 1, 2, 3, 4 set there. So let's try it out and do a refresh. And the results are all the same. So regardless of how it's written, you're being able to return back those same function results. And using the arrow expression, it allows you to simplify the statements and make it a whole lot more readable when you are writing your code. And you're also able to do it more on one line if necessary for the function returns. So try out these variations of functions, the function expression, function declaration that we've already covered, and then also try the newer format with the arrow functions. And you can be ready to move on to the next lesson.